Hey gang, it's me, Amy, again, welcoming you to another Dueling Rabbits Productions video about my Drawloom obsession. For this presentation, I thought it might be a nice idea to take a short break from tie-up diagrams and damask structures and talk a little bit about how I set up and weave single-unit designs. After that, we can reward ourselves with a walk through town. I'm currently working on a series of wall hangings for my new studio, all with personal meaning or shamelessly self-promotional themes. My first piece off the warp was this one, which I documented in my earlier tour of the Ulla Cyrus combination Drawloom. This representation of my signature boxing bunnies was woven using the loom's pattern shafts primarily, threaded with a single point for an all-over symmetrical design. I also used the pattern shafts for the stripes in the borders. But I required single drawcords for the verbiage up and down the sides of the piece, since they gave me the freedom to design the lettering in whichever way took my fancy. You can see the setup here, with the 40-odd pull handles for the pattern shafts arrayed on the right, and the two narrow sets of single drawcords positioned at either edge of the warp above the beater. While weaving my bun-buns, I was impressed by the degree to which the drawbridge is optimized for single-unit designs. The cords are easy to see, finely adjustable, and the hooks they attach to are robust and effective. I was emboldened to do something on my second piece that I've never done before, weave an all-over single-unit design. For inspiration, I turned to Atwater's classic and beloved Weave Truth with Trust, and got to work. This is what I came up with. You can see that I've used my pattern shafts in a few places, the stripes at the border, and also in this little chain-like motif up the sides of the central panel. I've preserved the 22 single units for the lettering inside the borders. But in addition, I have strung single drawcords across the units in the central panel to give me total freedom of design. This is my loom room at home. Here's the Mora band loom, the cats, Jensen and Button, the weaver, who could be me if I ever wore a dress, a shelf with cones of yarn and two sleighing hooks, and the window with its view of birds and flowers. As a designer accustomed to working within the constraints of pattern shafts, I found the creation of this piece to be liberating. Let's look at the new setup in a bit more detail. Here's the console at the front of the loom, where you can see the array of drawcords coming from above and through the reed. On either side are the previous cords for my border lettering. Across the center are my 63 additional pulls arranged in groups of 5 white cords and 5 gray cords each. The groups alternate to make it easier to select particular units when I'm weaving. There are a few additional cords on either side of the warp, color-coded for symmetry. The cords are very, very long. They are looped around the wooden crosspiece at their midsections before both ends travel up through the reed, over the metal rod at the top of the superstructure, and thence towards the back beam. The cords are routed over the tubes at the top of the loom before descending to the pattern leashes. The geometry of the setup means that all the cords are the same length regardless of the location of their associated leashes, and all cords are pulled to the correct height when they are secured around the hooks at the front of the loom. I left my leashes in their single point formation and attached the cords where the heddles were threaded onto their pattern shafts. I admit the connections are a bit of a rat's nest. The cords are too long, and until quite recently I had no definitive notion of the best way to secure the cords to their leashes. My preliminary system worked well enough, although my aesthetic sense was sufficiently offended that I vowed I would try to find a better way. A number of weavers suggested that paper clips can be used as efficient and inexpensive connectors, but I must confess I wanted something more traditional for my setup. Enter the estimable John Tovey, of whose book I have only recently become aware. Turns out, he was a great fan of weavers' knots of all kinds, and didn't mind editorializing about, well, everything really. He reserved special praise for the snitch, which he believed was the one absolutely essential knot for adjusting the loom. He might just be right. I have become a total devotee of the humble snitch. Here's how I'm employing its awesome powers for my single drawcords. First, I take up a lift heddle from my vast collection. If I didn't have any of these, a plain loop of seine twine would work just fine. I locate the 5-end leash in question. Here it is. I pass the heddle through and loop it around itself to make a lark's head. Now we're ready for the snitch. I make another lark's head at the other end. Now comes the clever bit. I retrieve the 2 ends of the drawcord and pass them through the opening I've just made. I snug up the lark's head and finesse it a bit to the height I want. As a final flourish, I tie the first half of a reef or square knot in the 2 ends, just below the lark's head. Just like that. The snitch is a great connection. Even with the slippery texsolve, it's holding firm in all directions. If I decide my cord is too long, I can easily tighten it up by pulling on both ends. If I'm too zealous and make my cord too short, loosening the lark's head is the work of an instant, allowing me to start over. It is completely brilliant. Next time I rig single units, this is the route I'm going to go. So now that we've got our single unit setup resolved, let's consider the next design and take that walk I promised. This is the drawdown for the hanging that's going to live in the hallway outside my studio, where it will hopefully attract people in droves. It is a stylized map of the city where my studio at the banana factory is located, my hometown, lovely old Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. In my representation, we're looking south. If you're familiar with Bethlehem, you might recognize some local sites. Here at the bottom are the Central Moravian Church and the Single Brethren's House, 2 beautiful 18th century buildings in the city's historic district. We continue up Church Street to the modern Municipal Plaza, where we stroll by the rotunda of City Hall, Joseph Greenberg's monumental sculpture, the symbol of progress, and the tea house in the Garden of Serenity, a gift from Bethlehem's sister city in Japan. We see a flag and a park bench and the 4 Advent candles that adorn the plaza during the holidays. Next, we cross over the Fahey Bridge to Bethlehem's south side, where we see the banana factory building with its wonderful flower sculpture out front. If we choose, we can climb South Mountain with its illuminated Moravian star, a symbol of the city that can be seen for miles around. I'm already making good progress at the loom. Unlike my previous 2 wall hangings, this piece is being woven upside down, so the pattern blocks will appear with a green, weft-faced effect when the thing is flipped over. This means, of course, that my lettering is upside down and backwards from my perspective on the bench. I finished weaving the church, the Brethren's house, and the curb on the northern side of Church Street. I'm now ready to start the plump little cars that are zipping by on their way to City Hall. This is what my lift plan looks like. Since Fiberworks limits my lift plan to 64 columns, I've done the design in 3 separate files and knitted them together afterwards. On the left here are the 11 units for the lettering on the left-hand side of the piece. I've used a green highlighter to mark the central unit, which on the loom has a gray drawcord. The lift plan on the other side includes the lettering for the right-hand border and the pattern shaft pulls for the chain motif here and the vertical stripes here. In between are the 63 units of the central panel. I've highlighted the groups of 5 with gray drawcords to forestall paralyzing confusion at the loom. It's time to weave my cars. I'm using a big pink post-it to mark where I am in the pattern. We're looking at this row here, directly below it. I cast my eye across and see that only 4 units are lifted, 2 in the 3rd group of gray cords and 2 in the neighboring group of white cords. The pulls for the borders are off camera. First, I will pull the letters in the left border. Just 2 units in this case, the central gray cord and its neighbor to the right. Done. Next, I'll pull the letters in the right border, 8 in total. 3 white, the gray one in the middle, and 4 more white. That's done. Mustn't forget the pattern shafts to finish off the borders. That would be disastrous. There they go. Now, time to address the central panel. A fresh setup always takes a little extra concentration. I count over to the third group of gray cords and select the third and fourth. I continue to the next group of white cords and select the fourth and fifth. Those are the tires for the first of my little cartoon cars. Now I weave. My structure is 5-end satin, which means I will treadle straight through my 5 ground shafts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This will give me a contrasting 5-thread by 5-thread unit wherever a leash has been raised. You can see the beginning of the first car here. Now it's back to the lift plan. It's much easier to see what we're doing this time around because we have established our bearings and are concentrating on changes to the pulls only. In addition to the changes to the borders, I can see that in the next row for my cars I will be dropping the pulls I just made and lifting the units on either side and between them. I diligently examine the entire row and make note of the unit off by itself over here. Using the previously pulled cords for reference makes the changes a fairly straightforward exercise at the loom, especially if I use 2 hands. The reed is keeping the draw cords nicely spaced, and there's quite a bit of visibility to the system. Oh, and I mustn't forget this random little unit over here. It's going to add interest to my road surface. Now that I've made all my changes, I do a quick sanity check and weave my way through the 5 ground shafts. Back to my lift plan. In addition to the borders, I have to make minor changes to the car, just 1 additional unit fore and aft. I also have to remember to drop my little random unit over here. I do that, being careful not to get the cords twisted as they loop around the wooden bar. There goes my random unit. And now I'm ready to weave 5 more picks. Time for another row already. This one's going to require lots of changes. I'm going to need to work on the shape of my car as well as add the broken lines that go down the middle of the road. I steel myself for lots of pulls. I find it easier to work in identifiable groups first, so I make the changes to my car before tackling the rest. Then it's a matter of pulling 2 cords and skipping one all the way across the warp. Well, that was surprisingly fast. 5 more picks to go. I just love this process, more than is healthy probably. I think it's because the gratification is so immediate. Each row builds on the next as the picture grows and takes shape. Even though I know what the design should look like, and I check often against the drawdown when I'm weaving, I still anticipate seeing how it will appear on the cloth and how well my vision will translate to reality. But I don't have to wait too long to find out. In no time at all, we have crossed the street and are ready to continue our walk through the city. Thank you so much for your company along the way. I hope you'll join me next time too, when I return to my regularly scheduled program of fiberworks, drawdowns, and woven samples to examine the exciting possibilities afforded for damask woven on 6 ground shafts.